Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 2 of the Q&A, so let's go ahead and get this started. Alright, first question. Hi Jason, coming out of the hole on the squat, my knees may temporarily buckle in slightly, so I feel my abductors are my weak link. Can I target this weakness with isolation movements for 2 weeks, and if so, what movements should I choose, and how should I program it? Thanks. Why would you think that? Why don't you change your mental cues? Some people will see things like this in their big exercises like the squat, and they will think that they have some muscular weakness. Well, here's the question I would ask you, and this is when you're dealing with any corrective exercise. Don't you think that if you just get stronger on an exercise in general, that your weakest muscle will come up also? Yeah? And I'm not saying accessory movements don't have their place, but for what you're dealing with here, there is no abductor movement you're going to do that's going to fix this problem, because this problem isn't necessarily weak abductors, it's your mental cueing. You need to learn to consciously turn your knees out. Consciously turn your knees out at the bottom, right? And if your knees are caving on your work sets, and it's fine. If it's a max, yeah, it might be an abductor issue. If it's a 1 rep max, a true competition max, and there's some caving going on. Or when you're grinding the final rep. But if you're seeing this on your work sets, that's not that muscle being weak, because if that muscle is being weak and giving out, you're not going to be able to do another rep. And you need to understand the difference between technique and an actual muscle weakness, because again, a muscle weakness that shows up on a rep, usually you're going to have to grind that rep and you're done. You're not going to be able to do another rep. You may not even finish that rep. So that being said, you need to learn to just turn your knees out more. And when you do your setup, you can focus on doing that consciously if you need to, right before you descend, to maybe focus on turning your knees out a hair and focus on driving those knees outward as you come out of the hole in the bottom, and that will fix it for you. I seriously doubt, if you're seeing this on work sets, that it's an actual muscle weakness. All right, next question. Hey Jason, do you really need wrist wraps to bench press heavy, especially if you have strong forearms? I like going completely raw for my lifts. I know for forearms, deadlifting with no straps is one of the best things for them. But can wrist curls and heavy hand grips have any added benefit to growth and strength? I already have big and strong forearms, but they are one of my favorite muscles to train. Thanks, man. Big fan of yours. You know, I'm not real big on a lot of supportive equipment, but when it comes to stuff like wrist wraps, what you need to remember, the issue is not strength. It's not your muscles or your forearms that are the issue. It's the smaller bones in your wrist and them dealing with a lot of compressive stress. And what you're going to find is that sometimes, because of the nature of the bench press, we're going to load more weight in our hands sometimes than our wrist can really handle and recover from easily, because of the nature of the movement. It's not really as natural of a movement as a lot of other movements, and so therefore, because you can lock yourself in certain ways, you can end up putting a lot more weight in your hands and directly over your wrists than you might otherwise be able to push. And so therefore, our wrists aren't really designed to handle that as well. And a lot of people can handle it, but I think what you're going to find when you start getting really strong on the bench press, the issue is going to be a lack of recovery in your wrists. In other words, you're going to be able to overtax the smaller bones in your wrists more than they're able to recover, and it's going to start interfering with your training because they're going to start hurting. You're going to possibly get some inflammation and stuff in there. And the wrist wraps basically just keep the joint a little more stable. They raise a little bit of the hydrostatic pressure, maybe in some cases in the bones or in the joints, but that's debatable. But the thing is, keeping the wrist just a little more stable so that it can't move so much, so that you can get away with more weight and more volume with all of the muscles that are actually involved. And the difference between that and, say, a knee wrap is that with a knee wrap, you're actually using the wrap itself to lift more weight, so therefore you're not getting more work in the muscles. Whereas with the bench press, sometimes your wrists themselves, just due to recovery and just getting beat up, can start to limit the workloads you're doing, and therefore can limit your strength and muscular development. So wrist wraps at a certain point start to become a good idea. But if your wrists don't hurt and they're having no problems, then no, you don't need them. You'll know when it starts to become a problem, basically, because your wrists are going to start hurting from pressing heavy. All right, next question. Hi Jason. I'm aware that you advocate full range of motion bench presses, but hypothetically, would you recommend partials without touching the chest or half reps touching the chest with no lockout? Stinks. No, I can't imagine any hypothetical situation in which I would recommend this, other than someone who's saying, I still want to use the same amount of weight, but I don't want my chest to grow as fast. Like, I'm scared my chest and my triceps are getting too big and too strong, and so therefore I want to limit their development. And the only problem with that is that it's also going to teach you bad habits that are going to make you weaker in the long term, because if you skip the lockout, you're not going to have as much lockout strength later. Not because we aren't stronger automatically at the lockout, we are. It's because you're going to train yourself to decelerate. Same thing with not touching your chest. You're going to set yourself up to be weaker and for higher risk of injury. So hypothetically, the only situation in which I would actually recommend this to someone is if I really hated them. Like, if someone was my enemy and I secretly hated them and I hated their guts and didn't want to tell them because for whatever reason, I might recommend they do just to increase their chances of getting hurt or to make them weaker out of spite, would be the only hypothetical situation in which I would do this. But anyone who was coming to me for real advice, who I wanted to be unhurt and get the best results possible, no, I can never ever think of a scenario in which I would recommend this. All right, next question. Hi Jason, what are some common causing factors for fresh novices to not be able to squat parallel or below parallel, and what coaching cues would you use to help them? Thank you. Injuries. Someone who has like injuries with their hip, really loose hips, like Brittany had, to where her hip would actually pop out of the socket when she walks. So again, maybe someone who's had a hip surgery that hasn't been fully repaired, maybe some loose ligaments, basically something that prevents them from doing that physically, which needs to be rehabilitated. But that's not going to happen from normal wear and tear for young people. Again, this is a problem for people who've had lifelong wear and tear. Like, if someone's a 20-year-old novice, this shouldn't happen unless there's some deformity in their hip that they need surgery or whatever to fix. So again, if a person is intact, there's no physical reason they can't squat to parallel. The biggest reasons tend to be mental in nature. It's that psychological fear of sitting back. It's the fear of falling over. And so the best thing you can do with those people is teach them to squat to a box. Use other methods like we also do with Brittany because of her fear to do it after rehabilitating hers. Maybe have them do kettlebell deadlifts to where they pull themselves down into a low position to the point to where they're squatting, and then film them squatting and show them, look, you're able to squat to parallel when you reach down to grab the kettlebell. And you do that to them after a couple of weeks of having them do that, and I think you'll find that they'll be able to squat just fine after that. So those are the two methods that I've personally used with people: squatting to a box or squatting to a stack of plates. You can use bumper plates because they're made out of rubber for a softer touch, or maybe throw a rubber mat on some plates. So you can use squatting to a box, or you can use stuff like a kettlebell deadlift to get someone to where they're doing it without thinking about it, and then show them, look, you are able to squat to depth, you can do so safely, you can do this without falling over, and then teach them to balance themselves and keep the bar mid-foot. That should resolve it. All right, next question. Good day, Jason. I had to take 1 week off from training due to issues with my job. Today I came back to the gym, but my low bar squat decreased by 10 kilograms. While all my other lifts remain the same or just slightly decreased. Any possible explanation for this big drop in squat strength? Note, I weighed 68.5 kilograms before my time off. Today I was 67.8, if that could be a factor. Thank you so much. Brother, you detrained. That's what happened. You probably lost a little bit of intramuscular water because your weight went down. So maybe you didn't quite eat enough. You lost a kilo. So you might have lost a little bit of muscle glucose. And you detrained all your movement patterns. There's a neural aspect to strength gains. This is why when we switch to a new lift, we gain strength on it really, really quick. Because we have the muscle mass already. We just have to train the neural pattern behind it. This is another reason I don't recommend taking weeks off. You need to find a way to get in and do all your lifts. If something happens to where you're going to be forced to take an entire week off from the gym, you need to find a way to get into the gym and do a full body session and just do your basic lifts, even with a deload if you need to. You need to get a deload workout in. So get your squat, bench, deadlift, overhead press, row, or whatever, and just run in and do one quick set with 50% of your max so that you don't have to warm up and get in and out so you can be out in 20 minutes. You need to find a way to get in and train. Otherwise, you're going to lose strength. You're going to detrain. You're going to detrain. That's just the way it works. And that's exactly what you experience. The upside, a week from now, after a week of training, again, your strength will be right back where it was and you'll be able to continue on. But you've got to factor in, you lost 2 weeks out of your progress for the year. You lost the week that you took off, and then you lost the week of progress in which you've got to relearn the motor patterns again. So lesson learned, try to do better next time. And if it's unavoidable because of your career, and I understand career has to come first because you're probably not lifting for a living, you're not a professional athlete, then that's life. Deal with it. It's going to happen. No different than had you had to take a week off from being sick. These things happen. And if it's unavoidable, it's unavoidable. But it's recoverable. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 3.